Hi, folks. This is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report. Well, for quite a while now, you've been hearing me talk about these little bitty baits that I use. And Z-Man is one of the companies that make them. Now, Z-Man is an easy name to remember, but there's other companies that are using this type of the Duratec plastic. It's a plastic that is very soft. I've talked about it a lot. It is so durable that you can use the same bait all day long. Okay, so how do you use it? And I think it might be important for me to share how I use this and why it's so great for me. Number one, I use a very, very light jig head. And the jig heads are especially made for these little baits. So I'm using a 1/20th of an ounce jig head. And the baits are basically 2 to 2.5 inches long. So you've got a little bait. Now, why do I use it so light? Because when I'm fishing the tributaries, they aren't that deep. When I'm talking the tributaries, it's the Grass River, the Deer River, the St. Regis River, the Racket River. The fish are in mostly shallow, oxygen-fed, ripply areas. And so I want something very light. I have to use an ultralight rod, and I'm using 10-pound braid with an 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. Now, that's a lot of words, but it's light line. It's very thin line. It allows me to take this little 1/20th ounce bait and cast it a long ways. But there's so much more to this. Once it gets in the water, when I'm fishing these rivers, if I just let it sink down, even though it's light, it'll sink down and it'll wedge in the rocks and get snagged, and I'll be going through jig heads and breaking line and having to walk in where the fish are. So what I do is I sort of monitor it as it's moving, and I try to keep it moving, not just with the current, but also I keep reeling it a little bit. Not like you'd fish a plastic worm for largemouth bass out in a pond. You let it go down, sit on the bottom, and so forth. I'm not doing this. Even though the baits aren't designed to swim like a paddle-tail jig, they will be very effective if you just keep moving it a little bit. And moving the rod up and down. So it's sort of coming up and down, and it's so effective that I've told you, I've had days where almost every cast I'm hooking a bass. Most of them are small, but it's just a fabulous way to fish. It is so effective, I can't tell you. The fish think that these little baits are real, and they hit them readily, and the big fish will hit them readily. Every time I'm going out, I'm hooking a muskie, and I'm not even trying to catch muskies. Heaven's sakes, I've just got a tiny little rod and light line and no way to stick my hands in their mouth. So that isn't my quarry, but it's a wonderful way to fish. And if you haven't done it, I think you really ought to give it a try. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report.